Follow the drinking gourd.
The Underground Railroad was a network of secret routes connecting one safe house to another, leading African American slaves to freedom. The first Underground Railroad was established as early back as 1687, and it did not lead to Canada. It led to Florida. It all started in 1687 when 8 slaves, including a child, arrived in St. Augustine after weeks of secrecy and turmoil. When they arrived, the Spaniards refused to aid them. Instead, they turned them over to the Catholic missionaries, whose one condition was that they willingly convert to Catholicism. This policy, created by the Spaniards promising sanctuary, soon was established, and slaves started to believe that freedom was possible. The Spanish believed the indigenous people and Africans could be converted, and as such were humans and had families and souls to save, says Jane Landers, a Vanderbilt University historian. In contrast to the British, whom saw slaves as property, the Spaniards saw slaves as humans who needed salvation. Slaves that ventured into Spanish Florida were accepted and welcomed as free by both the Spaniards and the Native Americans of the region. Those slaves that decided to find sanctuary with the natives were welcomed and accepted into their society. In exchange for refuge, the slaves were indebted to their Native American masters for a share of their yearly crops. Black Seminoles, as they soon came to be called, had their own land and livestock, grew their own crops, and married whomever they pleased. The slaves' only tribute was that of a portion of their spoils. It was a much different arrangement than that of the British. Florida's Underground Railroad was not an official railroad. There weren't any set safe houses and conductors, nor were there many records written documenting the amount of slaves that managed to escape. Although it was not official, the railroad stayed functioning for many decades. In 1763, when East Florida was ceded to the British, most of the African American population migrated to Cuba with the vacating Spaniards. Even though that seemed like the end of freedom for the slaves, Spaniards in West Florida and Native Americans in the whole land kept the railroad in operation, accepting more and more slaves and offering them freedom. Florida's Underground Railroad is a crucial piece of history that is not often talked about. This railroad paved the way for the rest of the Underground Railroad to form and become a symbol of hope for slaves. It is so important, yet is neglected and overlooked, thrown away in favor for the more popular and renowned route leading to Canada. But for me, Florida's role is far more crucial, and learning about Florida's role in the Underground Railroad opened my eyes to the hidden facts of the state in which I live. As I drive around my town, I look at things with a new light. I see beneath the houses and developments of a modern-day Florida, and imagine how it might have been back in the 1700s when the slaves were trying to find their way to freedom. I look around and I don't see homes or roads. I see a wild and uncharted Florida that was the source of hope for many slaves up north. Instead of malls and buildings, I see camps and settlements where slaves could find freedom and protection. I see faith and relief. I gaze out of my backyard and I imagine a wild glade where slaves bravely camped out and searched, hoping to find asylum. I replace the ruins of Fort Mose with a teeming community full of African Americans intermingling with the Spaniards and walking among them as equals and not property. And then I look back at my community, at my school and my friends, and I see how much we have changed. Now African Americans are free to walk around town without fear of being enslaved. African Americans can own land and businesses. They can marry and have families. They are seen as equals. I see all of this and I realize how important the Underground Railroad truly was. The railroad was the beginning of a long and painful road to equality, and without the willingness of the Spaniards and Native Americans to help the slaves, we might not have been able to live as we do now. Ray Charles would not have been able to perform and produce music because he was black. Barack Obama would not have been able to become president because he is black. My best friend would not have been able to walk around with me and go to the movies with me because she is black. I have developed an even greater respect and awe towards the African American slaves. Their enslavement in times of misery and suffering was an unfortunate event that showed the flaws of mankind, but it also allowed us to change and fix our wrong ways. So much change came from just a simple act of offering shelter to those in need, and that simple act of kindness became an important fixture in history. It sparked more acts of kindness that formed into the Underground Railroad. Florida's Underground Railroad is so significant, yet it is not taught in schools or mentioned in textbooks. It is overlooked and neglected. But for every 100 people that overlook it, there are 100 that do not. Why is it then that we notice some things but not others? An answer to that question is, the more important it is, the more noticeable it is. Let's take Florida's Underground Railroad, for example. Florida's railroad was the first ever route to freedom that existed for slaves. It is extremely important, maybe even more so than the route leading to Canada that was established later. Yet it is left to collect dust on the shelf of American history. Another answer is, if it is not prominent and displayed, it is not important, and therefore not worth noticing. Let's take a painting in a museum, for example. You stop in front of a beautiful scene of lily pads on a lake, and you think, oh, that is so pretty. You ooh and you ah for a little longer, and then you move on to the next painting and repeat the same process. You don't stop to think about the time and effort the painter put into the painting in order to make it so beautiful for you. Both of their answers are true, but they branch off one main answer. If mankind is not informed of it, it is not important, and it is not noticeable. Florida's Underground Railroad is not commonly taught to students, so it is not important. Very few people know about it, so very few people care about it. The painter behind the painting is not usually talked about, so the painter's hard work is not usually important. We are all ignorant to many things, and those many things go unnoticed by us. If we are educated, then and only then we can change and grow out of our ignorance. So what is it then that deems what is noticeable and what is not? What is it that allows us to change and flourish? The answer is knowledge, my friends. Knowledge is the key to change.